When Dean Martin passed away in 1995, the world mourned the loss of one of the most beloved entertainers of all time. A man whose effortless charm, smooth voice, and magnetic smile defined an era. But behind the laughter, the smoky lounges, and the Rat Pack glamour was a story that few ever knew. Dean Martin wasn't just a singer or comedian. He was a man who built an empire, guarded his emotions, and left behind a fortune so vast it shocked even his closest family. Yet that fortune came with a cost, one that would make his loved ones weep. To the public, Martin seemed to have everything: fame, money, and endless adoration. But in the quiet corners of his private life, he battled heartbreak, loneliness, and a painful sense of detachment. When he finally passed away, the reading of his will revealed more than just wealth. It revealed decades of complicated relationships, hidden generosity, and heartbreaking decisions that would divide his family and haunt them for years to come. Dean's children, many of whom had grown distant from him, found themselves confronted with the man behind the myth. A father who loved deeply but showed it quietly, a husband who never quite escaped his demons, and an entertainer who worked himself into exhaustion to hide his pain. What his family discovered after his death would not only bring them to tears, it would change how the world remembered Dean Martin forever, long before his fortune became a family legend. Dean Martin was already a mystery wrapped in silk suits and cigarette smoke. To millions, he was the king of cool, a man who could croon a love song, crack a joke, and charm a crowd all in one effortless motion. But to those closest to him, Dean was an enigma, a man who lived his life behind a perfectly built mask of calm confidence and quiet distance. Born Dino Paul Crocetti in 1917 to Italian immigrant parents in Steubenville, Ohio, Martin grew up with humble beginnings. His early years were far from glamorous, working odd jobs, boxing under the name Kid Crochet, and chasing a dream that often seemed out of reach. But his natural charisma and voice soon carried him to the top. When he teamed up with Jerry Lewis in the late 1940s, their comedic chemistry turned them into Hollywood's hottest act. Yet even then, Dean never seemed intoxicated by fame. He played the part of the charming star, but off-stage, he preferred silence to spotlight. As the years went on, Martin reinvented himself. He became a solo singer, a film star, and later, a member of Frank Sinatra's Rat Pack, the group that defined cool in the 1960s. Surrounded by wealth, women, and fame, Dean stood out not for his arrogance, but for his calm detachment. While Sinatra thrived in chaos, Martin seemed to float through life, unbothered by the glitz that consumed others. He often joked that he drank constantly, but in truth, most of his boozing was part of the act. The real Dean Martin valued privacy more than pleasure. Behind his easy smile was a man burdened by quiet pain. His first two marriages ended in heartbreak, and his third, to Catherine Horn, eventually crumbled under the weight of his fame. He adored his children, but fame often stood between them. Dean was a father who loved from a distance, providing everything his family needed materially, but struggling to express emotion. His children would later recall that their father's love was felt more in gestures than in words, in the gifts he gave, the security he provided, and the way he silently made sure they were always cared for. By the time Martin reached the peak of his career, he had built an empire, millions from his films, television shows, and music royalties. Yet even as his fortune grew, he remained emotionally guarded. His mansion in Beverly Hills became both his sanctuary and his prison. While guests saw the laughter, music, and flowing champagne, few noticed the loneliness that crept in once the crowds were gone. Then tragedy struck, the kind that forever changes a father's heart. In 1987, his beloved son, Dean Paul Martin, a former Air Force pilot and musician, was killed in a plane crash. The loss shattered Dean. Friends say the light in his eyes never fully returned. He withdrew from public life, canceling shows and spending his days in solitude. For a man who had always hidden behind a smile, the pain finally broke through. When Dean Martin passed away in 1995, he left behind not just a vast fortune, but a lifetime of memories, regrets, and unresolved emotions. His wealth was rumored to be worth tens of millions, but to his family, it represented more than money. It was a symbol of everything Dean had built and everything he had lost. What they discovered after his death, the details of his will, his private generosity, and the secrets of how he truly spent his final years, would leave them stunned, heartbroken, and deeply conflicted. Because behind the King of Cool's easy grin was a man who had quietly shaped his legacy in ways no one ever expected. When Dean Martin's will was finally unsealed, those who knew him best were stunned. The man who had spent his entire career keeping his emotions guarded had, in death, revealed more about himself than he ever had in life. His fortune, estimated at more than $30 million at the time, a staggering amount for any entertainer of his era, was divided with precision, purpose, and, in some cases, painful honesty. Dean Martin's estate wasn't just money in the bank. It was a reflection of decades of hard work, discipline, and quiet ambition. He had investments in real estate, music royalties, film residuals, and even ownership stakes in clubs and restaurants. Every deal he made, every contract he signed, was done with an awareness that fame was fleeting, but wealth could last forever. Dean wasn't the type to flaunt his riches. Instead, he built quietly, securing his legacy piece by piece, while keeping his business dealings close to his chest. His children, Craig, Claudia, Gail, Deanna, Richie, Gina, and the late Dean Paul, had grown up surrounded by comfort, but never spoiled by excess. Dean believed in providing for his family without letting wealth define them. But as his lawyer began to read his final wishes, it became clear that his choices would stir deep emotions among those he left behind. Dean's will was structured to ensure that each of his surviving children would inherit a significant portion of his estate. Yet the distribution wasn't equal, a decision that left some family members quietly heartbroken. His daughter Dina, who had remained closest to him and had often helped manage his affairs in his later years, was given the largest share. Others received less, though all were provided for. But what truly shocked everyone was what Dean had left behind for the son he had lost. In a heartbreaking gesture, Dean had set aside a portion of his wealth in a trust dedicated to the memory of his late son, Dean Paul Martin. The trust was designed to fund scholarships for aspiring pilots, a tribute to his son's love for aviation. When his family learned of this, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The man who rarely spoke about his grief had silently immortalized his son's name in the most touching way possible. But even as his final acts revealed love, they also reopened wounds. Some of his children, especially those who had grown distant from him, felt the weight of their absence in his later years reflected in his will. They weren't angry, exactly, more heartbroken that their father's last words came not in conversation, but in legal documents. Dean's will read like a map of his relationships, where closeness thrived, generosity flowed, where distance grew, silence remained. Then came the private letters. Few knew that Dean Martin had spent his final years writing to the people he loved most, short notes that were found among his papers. To his family's surprise, many of these letters were not about fame, money, or regrets, but about gratitude. In one note to his daughter, he wrote simply, "I never said enough, but I always felt proud. You were my song." Those words, so rare from a man of few emotions, broke his children's hearts all over again. Dean's family soon realized that the money, as vast as it was, wasn't what mattered. What mattered was what it symbolized: a life of hard work, quiet love, and unfinished conversations. He had built his fortune to protect them, even when he couldn't express it in words. For the world, Dean Martin's death marked the end of an era. But for his family, it began a period of deep reflection on who he really was, what he valued, and how his wealth carried both blessings and pain. We'll uncover the hidden generosity Dean Martin showed throughout his life, the secret donations, the quiet kindness, and how his private acts of giving proved that the King of Cool had one of the warmest hearts in Hollywood. To the public, Dean Martin was the epitome of effortless cool, a man who seemed to glide through life without a worry. But those who truly knew him understood that beneath the tuxedos and jokes was a deeply kind man who gave more than he ever let on. While he rarely spoke about charity or compassion, Martin's generosity ran deep, often hidden behind closed doors and disguised under other names. His family, long after his passing, would discover just how quietly selfless their father had been. Dean Martin wasn't one to chase headlines or bask in public praise. In an era where many celebrities flaunted their wealth for attention, he did the opposite. Friends recalled that he preferred to give anonymously, often instructing his lawyers to send checks to hospitals, orphanages, and struggling artists without attaching his name. One of his favorite causes was helping young performers trying to make it in Hollywood, those who reminded him of his own hungry early days. More than a few now famous entertainers have quietly admitted that they once received an unexpected gift or a mysterious opportunity thanks to Dean's hidden hand. Even among the Rat Pack, a group known for big personalities and even bigger egos, Dean was the most quietly generous. Frank Sinatra might have been loud about his loyalty, but Martin showed it in quieter, more enduring ways. When Sammy Davis Jr. faced financial trouble due to mounting medical bills late in life, Dean reportedly paid off a portion of his debt without saying a word. When one of his longtime staff members suffered a family tragedy, Dean quietly covered the funeral expenses, never mentioning it again. His kindness extended beyond Hollywood. Dean was known to visit children's hospitals late at night without cameras or reporters, often bringing toys or funding entire medical treatments. He didn't do it for fame. He did it because he understood pain, loss, and the loneliness of chasing dreams. But even as his generosity touched others, it created complicated feelings within his family. After his death, when his children began uncovering evidence of these secret donations, they were deeply moved and heartbroken. Many had never known how far their father's compassion had reached. They found bank records, handwritten notes, and signed checks that told stories he'd never shared. For a man who had often struggled to express his emotions to those closest to him, his giving became his language of love. His daughter Deanna would later say in interviews that she finally understood her father after discovering these acts. "Dad didn't talk about his feelings," she said softly. "He acted them out. Money didn't mean much to him, but what he could do with it did." Those words captured the essence of Dean Martin's heart. In truth, Dean's quiet giving may have been his way of healing. After losing his son, Dean Paul, he became increasingly reclusive, but those close to him noticed a shift. He grew softer, more reflective, more giving. He began funding anonymous scholarships, sending gifts to veterans organizations, and ensuring that those who had once worked with him never faced hardship. In a way, his generosity became his therapy, a way to find peace with the world that had both blessed and wounded him. The discovery of his private philanthropy changed how his family saw his legacy. The fortune that once seemed like a symbol of distance now felt like proof of love, proof that their father's heart was far more open than they'd ever realized. Dean Martin's final years were quiet, but not empty. His love for his family, his compassion for strangers, and his sense of duty to those who helped him rise all became part of his final story, one that no stage or camera ever captured. We'll explore Dean's final days, the emotional farewell his family never forgot, and how the fortune he left behind became both a blessing and a bittersweet reminder of the man they lost, the legend who made the world smile while silently hiding his own sorrow. Dean Martin's passing in 1995 closed the curtain on a life filled with laughter, music, and mystery. Yet in the years that followed, his name continued to echo through the halls of Hollywood. His family, still reeling from the emotional and financial aftermath, eventually realized that his true wealth wasn't in the millions he had earned, but in the memories he left behind. His music, from Everybody Loves Somebody to Ain't That a Kick in the Head, continued to play on radios, movie soundtracks, and television specials. Every note reminded fans of the man who made cool look effortless. But behind that smooth voice and laid-back charm was a family learning to live with the complex legacy of a man they loved yet never fully understood. His children, who had grown up in the shadow of his fame, found themselves divided over what his fortune represented. To some, it was a reminder of his hard work and talent. To others, it symbolized the distance and emotional void he left behind. Despite their grief, they came together to protect his estate, ensuring his image remained as timeless as his music. Dean's posthumous success only grew. Merchandise, re-released albums, and biographical projects brought in millions more, cementing his reputation as one of America's most beloved entertainers. Yet it was bittersweet for those who knew him best. They saw how fame had both built and broken him, giving him everything yet leaving him yearning for genuine peace. In the end, Dean Martin's legacy wasn't defined by the millions in his bank account or the lavish homes he owned. It was the effortless warmth he brought to audiences worldwide. The wink, the grin, the croon that made everyone feel like they were in on the joke. His wealth faded, but his charm, humor, and humanity endured. Today, fans still speak of him not as a distant celebrity, but as an old friend, the king of cool who taught the world that class. Charisma and a sense of humor were worth more than gold. His family eventually came to cherish that truth, realizing that while they had lost the man, they would forever keep the music, and that was a fortune no amount of money could ever replace.